In today's video, we will be going over the full path. We'll be starting in Sequence 9, going all the way down to Sequence 0, covering all the abilities along the way. Without further ado, let's get straight into it. Let's kick things off straight away with Sequence 9 Seer, and it's a very decent Sequence 9, nothing too crazy, but nothing too, bad. They gain some very high spirituality for Sequence 9, they gain knowledge on ritualistic magic, divination, anti-divination, and they have some form of danger intuition, some very minor form, so very decent abilities. On top of this, they also gain enhanced memory, which, helps boost their IQ a tiny bit, but all in all, nothing too crazy. Let's move on to Sequence 8. Now let's move on to Sequence 8 Clown, and once again, it's nothing too crazy, but it's nothing too bad. But this is a common theme we'll see throughout the full pathway at the lower and mid sequences. So as a clown, they just gain enhanced control over their body in every way. So pretty much, first of all, their facial expressions, they can hide it. Unless it's pure shock, terror, some extreme emotion, they're always able to have a mask on and not show their true emotions, which can come in handy, for example, when going against someone of the spectator pathway who rely on tiny cues to figure out your real emotions, and they can use this during battle as well. On top of this, their actual bodies, such as their flexibility, their agility, and speed especially, all get massively boosted, and so does their balance. So even if there's a huge rocking ship, they're able to stay on it no problem at all. They can perform acrobatic moves such as backflips, being able to rapidly switch directions when going full speed. So a bunch of these smaller abilities like a circus clown would have. On top of this, their spirituality gets massively boosted, and their danger intuition gets a massive upgrade, which for Sequence 8 is a very good ability to have. They're able to basically, for example, if I'm standing at a door and someone's on the other side, I can pretty much predict who it's gonna be, who's on the other side of the door, and they can sometimes predict what the opponent's next move will be during battle. So it can be very, very useful to have. And lastly, they gain this ability where they can turn paper weapons and make them deal real damage. So I can make a paper dagger, throw it at someone, and it'll have the effect of a real dagger. So very decent abilities actually when you think about it, but again, not top tier in my opinion. Let's move on to Sequence 7. Now let's move on to a very underrated Sequence 7 in my opinion called Magician. Now it's underrated because it gives you such a variety of different spells. It gives you 9 new abilities. Yes, 9 new abilities. The first one being damage transfer. If I take a bullet to the heart and I'm about to bleed out, yeah, I can just damage that transfer to my hand and I'll be perfectly fine. My hand will take the damage, I won't be able to use my hand anymore, but I'd rather not be able to use the hand than be completely dead at all, right? On top of this, they also gain other things such as an air bullet. They can simply point at you with a handgun sign and shoot real bullets at you. On top of this, they can also use flaming jump, which is within like a 30-meter radius. If there's flames or anything related to that, they can simply teleport to that flame, which it can be very useful, especially if they plan beforehand the fight and set certain things on fire. On top of this, they gain access to paper figure substitution, which means when a fatal attack is coming towards them, they can simply avoid it by substituting with a paper figurine they planned beforehand. They can ignite surfaces within a 30-meter radius that are very flammable. They gain access to underwater breathing. They can drop paper as weapons. They can create illusions, and they can even soften their own bones. So when they take a hit, for example, they can soften the impact so they don't take as much of a hit. And this also helps their agility and their speed from the previous sequence, even able to perform these even more acrobatic moves, right? So very, very good Sequence 7 in my opinion, very, very underrated. And let's move on to Sequence 6. Now again, I'm really not sure what it is with the full pathway so far, but it's a very decent Sequence 6, and it's called Faceless. Now Faceless is a very specific sequence, right? And we see this a lot with actually Sequence 6s. Basically, I can transform into anyone, right? For example, I want to turn into my friend. Yeah, I can simply shape shift my own body and turn into my friend, right? That's why it's called Faceless. It's as if I have no face. I can always be someone else. On top of this though, the restriction is that I cannot turn into someone too tall or too heavy for myself, not at this sequence yet. So this means if I'm trying to copy an NBA player, right? I'm only like 177 centimeters. I'm only about 70 kilos. So if I'm trying to turn into someone that's 210 centimeters, 120 kilos, it's going to be very difficult for me. And I don't have the enough fat reserves to morph myself into that. Maybe I can copy their face, but it's going to be hard to recreate the entire body. On top of this, they also gain, boosting to their acting, so they can really act like the person they turn into, and enhanced memory. So whenever they see someone, they memorize their facial features, they memorize their body perfectly, down to the detail. A small mole on their face, yeah, they're gonna recognize that, they're gonna remember that, so they can use it later. So all in all, this can be extremely useful for escaping situations, for infiltrating situations, and it's just a pain in the ass to go against, because I can be anyone, right? If you're chasing me, I'm wanted, yeah, I have a new identity within a few minutes. Now let's move on to arguably a top 3 Sequence 5 in the entire series at its full potential, called Marionettist. Let me explain to you everything that's going on, because it is a pretty complicated Sequence 5. First of all, as the name suggests, they can now control marionettes, which is basically you turn someone into your own personal slave, right? They pretty much have no conscience anymore, they're only a soul. But the process of getting one is pretty difficult, so let me explain to you what's going on. First of all, they're now able to see spirit body threads, which are, think of it as threads coming out of a person's back, out of a person's body, right? All over their body. This means that invisibility will no longer work on them, because they can simply see the threads coming out of the invisible person, so they know someone's there. So it's just a small side effect bonus that they get, pretty much. Now, to control someone as your marionette, you have to get into a 5 to 10 meter range, depending on your digestion, and attempt to control the spirit body threads, sort of grasp them for yourself. Now, the issue is that 5 to 10 meters is not a long range. 5 meters is right there. And the person who's getting affected by the spirit body threads, they're gonna notice that you're affecting their spirit body threads. Everyone knows about marionettes and how dangerous they can be as a mid-sequence beyonder. So as soon as for example, I'm a sequence 5 or a sequence 6 pirate, and the marionette is trying to control me, I'm gonna realize, oh shit, someone's trying to kill me. So I just turn around and I shoot them. Right, dead. It's as easy as that. So you have to be incredibly smart with how you go about it, because when you're attempting to control it, especially during the initial stage, which will last 5 to 20 seconds, depending on your proficiency at using the spirit body threads, you are incredibly vulnerable, and the person can still fight back during that time, which is called the initial stage. If you successfully, knock them out and then control the spirit body threads, get past that initial stage, that's all that matters. Then they become still. They can't really move anymore. Their thoughts will turn slower and slower, and it's really, really hard to fight back after that point. It is pretty much over for you unless you have some kind of trump card. So after the initial stage, was 5 to 20 seconds, it takes another 3 to 5 minutes to fully control you, but at that point, you're unable to move, so it's pretty much free game for the marionettist. Now, once the marionettist has controlled you, you are their slave, right? You only have a soul left, you don't have a consciousness, you don't have anything, and they can control you from, 100 to 200 meters away, again, depending on their proficiency and their digestion of their potion. Now, another person won't even realize that you're a marionette because you still keep your own spirituality. You don't even use the spirituality of the marionettist, you use your own that you once had. So people don't even realize that a marionette's around. They can control you from far away, and it's free game for them. If someone kills the marionette, they can simply run away. They are in no danger whatsoever. And on top of this, once they're fully digest their potion, they control up to 3 marionettes. Now, there's some crazy combinations that they can do. If they control a shepherd at sequence 5, the shepherd can still use all their abilities. If they control someone from the monster pathway, they'll have incredible luck. If they control a wraith from the chain pathway, they can put the wraith in somebody. The wraith will make them unable to move, and then they can control the spirit body threads for free and get even more marionettes. So that is especially the most deadly combo, wraith and a marionettist. But yeah, very, very good sequence 5 if you manage to reach its full potential, but you have to be incredibly smart with how you go about things. But if you want a good example, just watch how Klein did it. Let's move on to sequence 4. Now let's move on to sequence 4, Bizarre Sorcerer, and this is where the full pathway truly starts to show why it's the strongest pathway in the series, in my opinion. First of all, they gain some access to concealment, not a truly authority or anything like that, simply the fact that they can hide their, beyonder level from other beyonders, which is pretty useful to have, right? Usually you can't hide the fact that you're a demigod, but now they can even hide the fact that they're a demigod from other beyonders and pretend that they're a sequence 6 or a sequence 5 or something like that, which is incredibly dangerous, since if someone provokes them thinking that they're a sequence 6, and they turn out to be a sequence 4, it's over for them, right? Anyways, as for their strength and abilities, let's go over those because there's a whole bunch of them. First of all, their damage transfer can now be transferred onto a paper figurine, completely avoiding the damage at all. Their air bullet now has the strength of an air cannon. They can use the flaming jump from up to 1 kilometer away. They can shapeshift into absolutely anything, right? Any creature, any animal, any width, any height, etc. And their marionettist abilities all get boosted, right? Earlier, they could only have up to 3 marionettes. Yeah, from sequence 5 to sequence 4, that increased to 50 marionettes, from 3 to 50. On top of this, their range that they could control the marionettes increased from 100 to maximum 200 to 1 kilometer. 1 whole kilometer. That's a very, very large radius to have. On top of this, they can pretty much seamlessly swap and teleport between any of their marionettes within their range. This means that if I'm in trouble, oh yeah, simply, I'll switch places with that tiny bug over there and shapeshift myself into an even tinier bug, the size of a molecule, right? So you're not gonna find me, and I'm simply gonna flame jump away, and I'm perfectly fine. On top of this, they also gain enhanced spirituality, which means that they can divine and use spirit vision with extreme proficiency, and nobody can really stop them from doing that. They're also one of the only pathways that gain access to their incomplete mythical creature form and are able to use it to some degree. Usually sequence 4s and sequence 3s, they gain access to the incomplete form, but they aren't able to fully use it, or if they do use it, they're simply gonna die. But the full pathway can. They can extract the worms, because it's like a bunch of invisible sort of weird worms. It's really disgusting, their mythical creature form. They can take these these worms out, turn them into worms of spirits, and gift it to their own marionettes. Now when they gift it to their marionette, the marionette can now use the abilities of a Sequence 4 Bizarre Sorcerer as well. So that they extract like 30 worms from their incomplete mythical creature form, put it into 30 different marionettes that are all within a 1 kilometer radius. All of those marionettes can use an air cannon, for example, or any one of the Bizarre Sorcerer abilities, be teleporting around, switching with each other, and they all gang up on one opponent. You can guess what happens, right? So it's really no debate that the Sequence 4 Bizarre Sorcerers are arguably the strongest Sequence 4 for this reason alone. The fact that you can share and basically turn yourself into 30 versions of yourself that all can use your abilities is absolutely busted in my opinion. But Sequence 3 only gets crazier as it is the strongest Sequence 3 in the entire series. So let's move on to that. Now let's move on to the undebatable strongest Sequence 3 in the entire series called Scholar of Yore. Now this is where the full pathway truly starts to separate itself. First of all, they gain 3 abilities related to history. Yes, they have control over history at the Sequence 3 level. Sounds crazy. Let me explain to you. The 3 sections are Historical Void Borrowing, Historical Void Summoning, and Historical Void Hiding. First of all, the borrowing and the hiding aren't very complicated, so let me explain to you those first. The borrowing is as simple as it sounds. They can borrow spirituality and, other body parts or basically borrow stuff from their past self. For 5 minutes ago, I was fine. Now I'm in the middle of a battle and I'm getting my shit rocked. I'm getting beat up completely, right? I can simply borrow my strength from my previous self and make myself strong again, make myself okay again and ready to go. Now hiding is as simple as that as well. They simply hide within the historical void, which is like a void of history that they gain access to at this sequence. And yeah, they can hide in there as long as their spirituality allows, and they have a pretty massive spirituality, with the only downside being that they have to exit in the exact same spot in the real world where they entered. So someone could technically just camp there, but while you're hiding in this void, you can get your teammates to help, you can get people to, you can figure something out, you can come up with some kind of plan. But all in all, of course, it is a very useful ability to have, but their main ability is the second one that I mentioned initially, which is the summoning. Pretty much, they can summon people or objects that existed in the past as a limited time from the historical void. Now, there isn't always going to be a successful summoning. Basically, it all depends on your own proficiency using the historical void. It depends on how well you know the person in order to be able to summon them, and it depends on the person's sequence. So if I summon a sequence 1, they're not going to have the strength of a sequence 1. They're going to be, readjusted their level to how good I am at controlling them, how well I know them, and my sequence myself. So at sequence 3, they might only have the strength of a sequence 2 themselves. Now, the crazy part is that these historical void projection have their own spirit body threats, so they can also be turned into marionettes. So basically what I can do is when I'm not in danger, I don't have to use this in the middle of a battle, I can, prepare myself with a group of people, summon a historical void, and attempt to control their spirit body threats. So then gaining another marionette tells their teammates in advance to go into the historical void and prepare themselves to take over the consciousness of the historical summoning. For example, I'm a Sequence 3 Scholar of Yore. I have a teammate who was once a Sequence 1 Angel, but now are only unfortunately a Sequence 4. I tell them in advance, I bring them to the historical void, I tell them, wait here, I'm going to summon your projection, I need you to take it over. So when I'm in the historical void, when I'm in the battle, I summon their prime version of themselves, which is the Sequence 1 version, and then they take over their prime version. And not only do I have the summoning of a Sequence 1, but I also have the intelligence of a former Sequence 1. Because usually these projections aren't going to be very smart. Think of it as basically they're now able to attempt to control someone's spirit body threats in a 500 meter radius, and they can achieve initial control in just 2 seconds, and they can achieve full control in just 10 seconds. So some pretty busted stuff, and let's move on to sequence 2. Now let's move on to sequence 2, Miracle Invoker, and honestly this sequence 2 is a very hit or miss. Let me explain to you why. They gain access to wishing, which means they have to start off with smaller wishes, but as they complete smaller wishes through mystical artifacts, through their own abilities, etc., they can start building up to bigger wishes. However, the bigger wishes, as you push the boundary of that, they will get more distorted, which means, for example, if I wish for endless money, I might turn into gold myself, and then I'll be able to easily die. So you have to be careful with the constraints and what exactly you wish for, but if you manage to build a bunch of wishes for people, you can use a miracle for yourself. Now, a miracle can do anything. It is a miracle. This is where the pathway, this sequence starts to shine, right? For example, if I'm stuck against a sequence 0, right, which is my worst nightmare as a sequence 2, and they attack me, I can use my miracle in that moment, survive. That's my wish. And, maybe I'll teleport to the other side of the world. Maybe I'll magically block the sequence 0's attacks and take no damage at all. So you can truly achieve some crazy effects with the miracle once you reach it, once you push those wishes. Now, on top of this, they gain other things, such as increase to their spirit body threat control. They can control up to 5,000 marionettes now. They gain their full complete mythical creature form, which is a bunch of illusory maggots all around. It is absolutely disgusting. It is the most disgusting mythical creature form in the entire series. Honestly, I don't want to even imagine it. But they can separate the worms of spirits. Remember, I told you back in sequence 4 they only had 100. Yeah, they have 5,000 that they can separate now. And remember, they can put these into into their marionettes, and then the marionettes can use their abilities. So you can have some pretty broken Sequence 2 level marionettes walking around wherever you want. They can now control these marionettes within a massive, city level scale. They're also able to partially jam into fate and influence the future so that the probability of something becomes larger or smaller. They're now even able to resurrect, which means they can basically, when they die, their Beyonder characteristic will enter the historical void, fuse with their worms and spirits from the past, and then when they want, the worms and spirit will simply exit the historical void and they will revive. Now they can do this up to 3 or 4 times at the Sequence 2 level, and this replenishes every sequence after this. So, very, very good, with the only downside being that they, pretty much resurrect where their body died. So someone, again, could just camp on their body. However, as a miracle invoker, you can use your miracle and revive somewhere else completely. So if I've completed enough wishes and now it's time for me to come back and I know an enemy is camping there, it's time to use my miracle. I'll simply move my physical body using my miracle and enter and revive in a safe spot. So very, very good Sequence 2 if utilized properly, but it is very hard to do that. Let's move on to Sequence 1. Now let's move on to Sequence 1 Attendant of Mysteries, and it doesn't seem like a super strong Sequence 1, but it is definitely a top 5 out there. Basically, first of all, they're able to regenerate not humans, not lives, but spirit body threads in order to control them and turn them into marionette, which they can do in only 3 to 4 seconds now, which is incredibly quickly if you compare it to the 5 minutes we first saw at Sequence 5. So basically, if someone's dead, an old Sequence 2, I find a Sequence 2 that is my biggest wish as a Sequence 1 Attendant of Mysteries, I can simply regenerate their spirit body threads, not their body, so they won't be able to fight back. And I can simply control them and take them. It's free game. They can't even do anything about it. They're long dead. It doesn't matter to them anyways. Now the other authority they get is the authority over change, more specifically grafting, which is basically breaking down things and reassembling them. They can achieve all types of effects with this. It is one of the most versatile abilities, probably the strongest Sequence 1 ability out there. Think about the fact that I can simply break down the distance between myself and my door over there, which is about 10 meters away, and I can graft the locations together. I can reassemble them together, and I can achieve teleportation in that way. I can achieve this on a much grander scale for hundreds and hundreds of kilometers, and I can do this with all types of things, such as grafting endpoints, start points, anchors, prayers, which means if someone desperately needs anchors in order to control themselves, I can simply graft those away and even take etc. So all the abilities they got as Sequence 7 Magician. And yeah, that's pretty much it. They're also able to revive 4 times again. So as a Sequence 2, I was able to die 4 times and come back to life 4 times. And again, at Sequence 1, I'm able to die 4 times and revive 4 times again. The counter gets reset. So very, very strong Sequence 1. And let's move on to Sequence 0. Now let's move on to Sequence 0 Fool, which in my opinion might be the strongest Sequence 0 in the entire series. The first authority they get is fooling, and they can fool concepts themselves such as time, history, change, mind, etc. Let me explain to you what's going on. First of all, time. Imagine time is frozen by another Sequence 0 or Great Old One. It doesn't affect them. They can simply walk through that time. On top of it, they can simply mess with time itself. For example, if someone was burned by a fire, right? I burned my hand, right? But over time, it'll go away. Yeah, the Fool, if he wants to, he can keep that burning effect on me for as long as he wants, simply because he has the authority over fooling time itself. On top of this, they can also fool history. If they can't change history, but if they want someone or the whole world to think that something always existed, the whole world will think that something always existed. I created a country and I want the whole world to think it existed. They all believed it was part of the history books, even though it wasn't. So you can't change it, but they could, make people believe something happened that didn't. On top of this, they can also forcefully lower people's IQ. IQ is so important, especially when it comes to other Sequence Zeros, because they're plethora of abilities. Now, as a Fool, I can lower someone's IQ and then they aren't able to utilize their abilities correctly. I can use my other fooling authorities. I can use my Divine Kingdom to conceal all of us together and have more authority over space and time, but we'll get to that in a second. So I can just mess around with people so much. Use destiny. This means that their destiny is set and no pathway with fate control can really affect them much, which is a pretty useful defensive measure to have, because a lot of pathways, actually, you'd be surprised, have control over some level of fate, so they can't really affect the Sequence 0 Fool with it. So all in all, you can see that it is pretty broken, simply because of the fact of the change authority and the fooling authority. Now they go hand in hand, so using grafting, which I mentioned as Sequence 1 at the Sequence 0 level, and on top of the fooling, being able to forcefully lower people's IQ, partially control the spirit world, you can see why the Sequence 0 Fool is really broken. In my opinion, overall, the Fool pathway might be top 1 in the series. I don't think the lower sequences are even that bad as people make it out to seem. I think they give you some very decent, escape capabilities and survivability. And of course, after you get to the Sequence 4 level, it is so hard to kill you, right? It is so hard to kill you. Always come back, especially Sequence 2, 1 and 0. You can resurrect countless times. If even one of your worms, your spirit worm survives, you can come back. And keep in mind, those spirit worms can turn into molecules. So it is ridiculous, right? In every way. Honestly, I love this pathway. I'm actually going to give it SSS+. I'm putting it at number 1 on the leaderboard, top of the tier list right now. But let's go over other pathways such as the error pathway, and then we'll see. Anyways, regardless, I hope you enjoyed the video. I wish you all the best, and love you guys. See you all in the next one.